Hello and welcome to Goop Book Club. I am so excited about today's chat. If this is your first time joining us, welcome, welcome. We read about one book a month. You can always go to goop.com/goopbookclub to see what we've read in the past and what we're reading next. We have a Facebook group where we talk about the books throughout the month. We sometimes do small Zoom chats just for our members. And of course, at the end of the month, I get to show up here and talk with the author live. We are live, so apologies for any tech glitches. You can submit questions in real time if you're watching live on YouTube, and our team will send them over to me for Calla. And yeah, let's get right into it. So our author today is Calla Henkel, who is a writer, a playwright, an artist. This novel, Other People's Clothes, that we've been reading, it was one of those books that just came to me right when I needed it. It was December, over Christmas break, when I was reading an early copy, and I was just feeling a little down. And I've said this before, I don't use this adjective often, but it was such a delicious read for me. It was so fun and so, just so thought-provoking, and I had such a good time reading it. And I can't always say that. It is about two American art students, Hailey and Zoe, who don't know each other very well until they both wind up studying abroad in Berlin. And they sublet an apartment from a thriller writer, Beatrice, and they soon begin to suspect that Beatrice is following them and spying on them. And one of the students, Zoe, decides she's going to give Beatrice serve her up some plot inspiration for her next novel. And the book is about obsession and friendship and art and pop culture and in Berlin, which I love because if you've watched before, you know I went to Berlin this summer and became obsessed myself. So I am so excited to bring on Calla and talk to her today. Calla, coming up to us from your bar and your performance space, which we need to talk about.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me. And I'm so happy you enjoyed the book. It's the best.
Oh my God, so much. So thank you for agreeing to read an excerpt today. Do you want to start with that?
I'll just jump in.
Thank you.
Yes. So, yes, we had the brief intro, so I'm just going to go. I had really only known her from a distance. I never imagined spending a year in a foreign country with Hailey Mater. I knew she wore Chanel Mademoiselle, a ubiquitous Windexy vanilla scent that was popular with dental hygienists, gallery assistants, and other women proximate to benign power. I knew she possessed the frightening fortitude to break her own nose, chewed dentine ice gum, and decorated her dorm with 1930s posters of Italian liqueurs. But I had no idea what Hailey's artwork was like. I'd never seen her in the pit. She told me once with an air of deep seriousness that her work was conceptual, as if that explained everything. At school, to me, she was a character in a poorly acted TV show with only the edges of an identity. But apparently Hailey could speak German, a fact that Carol had been excited to relay while handing me a wad of brochures. I was relieved I wouldn't be alone, relieved someone else might have a plan. I still had Hailey's number from a study group, so I called and she'd sounded genuinely excited, rattling things off. Her tickets were booked. She'd found a hostel. She'd gotten a new SIM card. But there had been a slight falter in her voice toward the end of the conversation, a barely noticeable shift in tone, as if it were just dawning on her that she would no longer be alone. I imagined Hailey might have wanted to reinvent herself in Berlin. Maybe she'd watched Cabaret with Liza Minnelli too many times, or planned on cutting short bangs and producing techno, or maybe she too hated the sculpture dicks. Whatever it was, by the end of the call, she knew we were stuck together. Our first meal in a proper Berlin restaurant was at a fondue place near the hostel. A dark hobbit hole with knobby wooden chairs, thick menus, and flickering candles. The waiter was cute in a teenage heartthrob way and kept theatrically checking in to make sure we were okay, retreating with a wink. I asked Hailey why he was being so nice. We're hot and barely 20 and foreign. She stared the waiter down with a fuck me grin while sopping a square of bread through the thick, bubbling cheese. He reciprocated with a head nod as if he were going to go jerk off in the bathroom. So, what happened with Ivy? I stuttered. I hadn't realized she knew about Ivy. I'd missed my final crits for the funeral, so I guess everyone in my studio classes knew. But I had somehow hoped to keep her for myself here. Just before I'd left for Berlin, I was still regularly forgetting, thinking of things to tell Ivy, pulling out my phone, and only after I'd begun typing would it hit me that she was gone. She was murdered, I said, matter-of-factly, startling myself. I know, Hailey said, subtly gesturing her knife towards her neck. Do you know who did it? Like, do you have any ideas? They think it was random. I was mushing the remnants of my food on my plate. I wasn't ready to trust Hailey with Ivy. She was holding my stare. She wanted more. She jabbed a chunk of bread. Nothing's random. I shifted my focus to the drone of the refrigerator holding chocolate cakes iced in what appeared to be whipped concrete. Did you dye your hair to look like her? How did you know she was a blonde? I asked, startled. I looked up on Facebook. She paused. Everyone loves a dead girl. I nearly choked. Hailey continued, and anyway, we can be best friends now. I never really had one. My family moved around a lot. Yeah, so that was my little chunk.
I love that passage. I was going back and rereading things I had underlined last night, and so many of them were Hailey descriptions. Like, I love this one. This is a little later on page 35, just this one line. Hailey had a way of making everything seem like it was for some larger purpose, not God, but self-narrativizing. Um, and I'm just curious, like, how did you bring Hailey to life? Like, how did the specific details, like that perfume line? One of my friends was like, that's like the greatest detail ever about a character. How did sort of Hailey come to life for you with through these very specific details? Like, who was she in your mind, and how did she form?
I think she was this like kaleidoscopic kind of version of all of these extreme girls that I knew. I also lived in Florida for a while, and like I was just so amazed by this sort of like type of like world building that went into like kind of the female performance and like the Bath and Body Worksification of kind of all exchanges. And like I don't know, I also like I think this time when you're trying to figure out who you are through like I don't know, objects and smells and scents and this like I think it's like very intense and important. And I wanted Hailey as a character to kind of like understand that it was important in a real way. Because I think so often with that stuff, people are like, oh, it's girly, it doesn't matter. But like I wanted Hailey to be like this kind of like arbiter of all of that being important and kind of like making or breaking a presence in the world and not being ashamed of that. And I think in a lot of ways, she like had a lot of my worst traits and a lot of my like best friends' worst traits. This sort of like, this main character energy, kind of to like the most extreme.
Yeah, and I think too, though, it's interesting what you said about not putting down any of those sort of like passions or interests, because they can be so formative, and especially at that age. Like, I love, there was also the example you gave, I think, where Hailey's going into the really artsy like film shop, and it's like she asked for like my best friend's wedding or something, like unapologetically, and how it's like, as a reader, I love that about her too, just the way that she wore pop culture and the way she looked to it for inspiration. There was something about that was very, I don't know, fun and real.
Yeah, I also think she was sort of like before her time in a way. Like if you think about 2008 as this moment, especially like I went to art school in 2008, so like Hailey was not there. That was not what was in, and like I think she was like willing Instagram into being. She was like willing this kind of like she wanted to have a platform to represent herself so that she wasn't being mediated by others. And I think like her shamelessness was sort of like blazing that trail as she was like also at the video store ordering Notting Hill or whatever it was.
Oh,
Yeah.
Nana Hale, right? Yeah. um, and I think the other thing that made Hailey more interesting to me too was that we were seeing her through, uh, oh my God,
Zoe,
through
yeah.
Zoe's eyes. So it was like it was always getting her perspective on her. And Zoe's monologues also felt, I mean, right from the beginning, I was just so captured because I just felt like, oh, this is a real person talking directly at me. Like I felt like I was inside Zoe's mind. Um, how did Zoe come to you, and did you always know you were going to tell the story primarily from Zoe's point of view?
I think I got to Zoe's point of view, I think also primarily because I was interested in thinking of her also sort of as a camera that was on Hailey. Like she becomes this sort of lens that you see her through. But I started writing it because I also went abroad in 2008 to Berlin, and I also studied art here. And I did move into a house of a very famous writer who is like very niche and cool and amazing and was not watching us. But like my friend who I moved in with, we did get obsessed with her and we read all her books. And it was like only later that it sort of clicked, this idea, this kind of thinking about the perversion of us being in her house and kind of reading her books and thinking about her too much. And so I already had this relationship to not being that character, but sort of talking about the friend that I was with. And it mutated to this point where Hailey is nothing like the friend that I actually went abroad with, and no one was murdered and none of that insanity ensued. But I think that the voice came from that time period and from my own experience there. But I do not feel like it's me at this point at all. But that is how I stumbled into it.
That was definitely a question in the group, like which of your or what were like interests were inspired by you? Like, are you a pop culture like where sort of or like collage and art, but it seems like it's maybe more interest driven, not necessarily the other
Yeah.
components.
I mean, I think like I'm really interested in like performance. And so I think a lot of Haley's questions I like are sort of questions that I work collaboratively that we've kind of processed thinking about kind of like how deep you can go into a narrative and what happens when these like kind of lines and walls blur and build. But I think also like in some ways Zoe's process with art was similar to my art process back when I loved collage and like I thought I was going to be a collage artist, which I'm not. But so and I also like that it's like collage is this like kind of thing where you are trying to make a whole from many pieces, which for me is sort of like exactly what Zoe is constantly trying to do throughout her kind of process of coming of age in this very messed up situation.
Yeah. And I think too, like, right, drawing from different like sources of inspiration and trying people on, which is like what she was doing, playing dress up to an extent in all of these different sort of deeper ways. Um, Another thing we had a lot of questions about from the group was just the theme of obsession and how it kind of like runs throughout in like big and small ways. And was that something that you wanted to explore from the beginning? This idea of what is obsession, like where do we draw the line? What is like a fascination and interest and
Yeah, I think everyone I think in the book is like deeply obsessed with someone or something, and I was really interested in kind of thinking about how obsession and performance kind of overlap, and when people know what it means to know you're performing for someone, and what it means to kind of have that stage flip. And so I think everyone in the book, Beatrice and Janet are doing it for each other. Hailey and Zoe are doing it for each other. There's these like dualities that I think creep up in different ways and they all need each other. And I think obsession is also kind of the gasoline that fuels all of these characters' kind of relationship to growth and kind of like it's also sort of the only thing that they've known. And so, kind of, when these four people meet each other, there's this sort of combustible moment that I think is lit on obsession.
yeah, and I think it's so interesting that you brought up like reminding that it was 2008, and just because it is so true. I mean, even in our daily life, it's like there are moments when we have to ask ourselves, like, are we performing or not? And especially now with like social media, that's like tenfold. But we all have those moments throughout our day where I think we can kind of like catch ourselves. So where we're like, who am I who am I doing this from? Who am I doing this for, you know? Um, and obviously this goes to like, this is on a bigger stage, but I think that is a really interesting way of like thinking about it.
Yeah, and I think like it's also funny for me that like 2008 is now like a period piece. There really is this kind of like I think we've crested this moment where we can look back and really realize that we had these kind of very different relate like Facebook was kind of the only like format for this sort of exposition of self and like I think there's like a drama. I mean, there's already like the tension. You can't like write, I mean, you can write a different type of thriller, but there's already these like, you know, everything all the time. You know, that's like this, like the comedy of this current moment. So it's like, I think there was also a pleasure in writing from that time period when they still had like a Nokia brick phone, you know, and there can be these sort of lags in it. But like I said, I also think they really were like willing the future into being like wanting to like own that idea. And that's, I think, at the end, the book is really about this idea of how do you own your own narrative and kind of like how far does that take you and what happens if you succeed. And I think everyone ends up paying a price kind of for that question in the book.
Yeah. How did you pace out the book? Like, was the plot something that you knew, like the overall structure, how it was going to hang initially and how things would end for everyone? Or how did you kind of like play with, because so much of the tension in the book is like with the pacing and the timing and the moving and the timeline. So how did you kind of like think about that?
I like really wish I was someone who could just like plot it all out on the wall with note cards and then just sit down and bang it out. But it was very much the opposite, which was it's also my first book, so I was like learning how to write a book as I was writing it. And the delightful thing is I just like kept kind of surprising and scaring myself. So that I think there was this like extreme pleasure to also kind of building these people and then kind of letting them take their own course. They definitely like walked me, especially Hailey. I think once I understood her motor, she just would just like surprise me endlessly because she had this like I realized this like ability to kind of move so quickly through space and yeah, so it was definitely not plotted with extreme pre-thought, if you will.
No, I feel like that's more impressive to me because there were parts of the book where it kind of felt like you were like channeling or something, especially between like as the connections became like deeper and deeper. Um, and I was just thinking about this moment. This is towards the end of the book on 300 and 301. Um, and Zoe is kind of like piecing things together, and she says, Janet putting a black wig on in the bathroom of Books a Million for a meet and greet was absurd, but I could almost empathize. I had pinned Hailey's red hair to my own scalp. It seemed impossible that we had all found each other, Beatrice and her mother, me and Hailey. We were the carnival women who'd been sawed in half and never put back together, banished to the Hall of Mirrors. I had hated Beatrice, but she had taken the leap. She had betrayed her mother, who had betrayed Hailey, who had betrayed me. It was also tightly braided, the imitations and their makers. And I just thought of that when you said that thing about the end, about like who, like writing our own narratives, claiming our own stories, and how we all kind of sometimes become these like twisted characters in one another's stories, and you don't necessarily know where one person ends and where another person begins. But I thought it was interesting how at the end you kind of gave Zoe this ability to start to see like all of the different connections and the ways that she had been used or she had used other people, and the way they kind of like all had these they were all striving in a way kind of to write their own story.
Yeah, and I think I don't know, like, I don't think anyone wins, but I do think that everyone gets exactly what they want in the end, which was like, somehow I also wanted this moment, like, kind of in the end when I was like unpacking this thing. I was like, oh, it's like there is this beauty to everyone kind of getting the recognition and the space or the tools. I think Zoe is kind of in the very end given the tool to maybe deal with the grief that started her in this situation. And so like I do think that like very much the ending deals with this meditation on how you kind of like unpack, I don't know, everyone's desire And I think everyone walks away with something that they wanted in some way.
Yeah, and I think desire is a good point because so much of this was about like their different desires and what they were striving for. Someone in our book club, at first I didn't understand, but have you read Animal by Lisa Taddeo?
I have, yes. Talk about a book about
She,
design. Yeah.
yeah. So she like drew some interesting comparisons, but I think part of it is too, this is Sarah, who's a wonderful reader, but I think part of it is too that you know, stories that explore women's desire in a way that doesn't criticize that. I think so often it's like in a story or in real life, it's like a woman's desire is seen as like unhinged or crazy. And
Yeah.
it's like, even if it is, that's like, it's normal. Like, sometimes like the most normal reaction to something that happens in the world is to like go absolutely like batshit because how could you not, and I felt like this did have that energy to it where it was like, yeah, horrible things and insane things had happened and that they were kind of responding to that. Even like this is like the sculpture dicks, like, which was so funny, but it's like, even how could you not like go completely mad as when someone's
Yeah.
critiquing your work like that?
Yeah, I think it's like, and maybe in line with Animal, it's like it deals with these sort of kind of like ritualized violence, but allows you to kind of like be inside the head of someone who's like, and then also with Hailey, who someone is going to just like fucking reject it and figure out how to do it in their own way, and it does look like a kind of like rage thing, but it actually is much more synthesized than that, and I think that is maybe the pleasure is when you're in like a filter for that type of rage that starts to make it make sense and removes the kind of like hysteric quotes on it or something.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm glad you brought up violence. This was another passage I had underlined and I was rereading it last night. This is on page 73, and we haven't talked about this yet, but it's just like the Law and Order SVU mentions, and obviously, but so this is each crumpled female form discovered by a jogger helped turn Ivy's death into an episode of normality. This was something that happened to girls. Their lives were swept away to the wheedling of a saxophone. It was normal. Um, which that line like struck me so hard, just the normalization of violence against girls and the way it's portrayed in the media. How did you always know the Amanda Knox case would like play a part in this, and then this other idea of sort of like the Law and Order SVU, this kind of like, I don't know if it's an obsession, but just almost the entertainment of violence against girls and women. Like, how were you kind of like holding those different things and thinking about like weaving them into the narrative?
I mean, I think like they kind of all came together naturally, and I think they also really come from that time period. And I think like American Apparel and the use of kind of like women's bodies for that advertising, which looked very similar, weirdly, in my mind to like the imagery that was coming out of these like women in dumpsters from Law and Order SVU, and the kind of use of like violence against women as a main thread of entertainment. And I think Amanda Knox was this sort of like ultimate icon of that, the vehicle of that violence, in the way that like tabloid culture and also like we as a consumers of media kind of completely devoured her. And somehow I think like all my friends watched Law and Order SVU back then, and like I think it also overlaps with this Perez Hilton moment where he was also kind of like writing like terrible thing, like basically like we wanted these women, we were pressuring these women to a point where I feel like we wanted them to die, and that had kind of been what I was thinking about from that time period, about how like watching these like celebrities in cars getting chased and watching this like the way we like were consuming images of women. It was this sort of, I don't know, pressure cooker to me that I wanted to put into the book. And I didn't always know Amanda Knox would be in there, but I think because she went abroad and because she was a part of that kind of conversation as this sort of like icon of the young American outside of America, it sort of became inevitable.
Yeah, I've definitely, since I finished reading, have thought a lot about how I consume images. Just I feel like the news or things have hit a little bit differently when I think about it. Um, and another question we got live, which is I think sensory is a big role of the book too, as well as visual. But so this is from Sarah. Scent plays a large role throughout the novel. Why did you choose to use scent as identifying feature of characters like Beatrice and Claire?
I think like for me, I've always loved scent, and I like this thing that like it can be disgusting and revolting, but also like extremely intoxicating. And like when I grew up and went to high school, like Tommy Girl like is this one person, whereas like Aqua di Gio was this one dude. And I was very aware of kind of like what happens when you like I also feel like it's so transportative. So like obsession linked with scent to me do things that I think in your mind you can go there much faster than like obsession and visual. So like I think kind of this like wanting the book to run on this energy of obsession scent for me made so much sense as a kind of way to bring the reader in. I also love the like scents from that time period. I think they're very specific, and I think a lot of people are like triggered just by like reading the descriptions of them, which I love.
100%. Like it's such a time and a place and a vibe. I also think it's funny. I have a friend who worked at a perfume counter, and she would say, like, she would talk about like when someone was coming up trying to guess
Yeah.
what scent they were going to go for, and like how funny it would be when she got it right, or when there was like some type of like surprise.
Yeah.
Um, but totally. I mean, the other really big thing is place, and obviously you live in Berlin. But how was it for you? Because I've been there only once, but I fell in love, and this book so brought it alive for me. Like I loved all of just the specific details, and when you mentioned neighborhoods, but was it hard? Was it easy or hard to write about Berlin? And I mean, I'm assuming you always knew it's such a big part of the novel that you always knew it would be set there for the obvious reasons, but
Yeah,
what was that like?
I think like it couldn't be set anywhere else. I think that's also this novel that's really about kind of using also like partying as this like platform for performance and trying to kind of harness an entire evening into like the background for your own show, which is like so psychotic, but I think also really like baked into the logic of this town. And I think it's like from cabaret to like Berghain, it's like this kind of like you have to really think about your costume and kind of how you're going to like integrate into these spaces in a way that I think is very specific. And I think the girls kind of are so rejected in the beginning and accepted in the end. And this sort of like relationship to that sort of performing is very specific to the city. And I like love that it takes place all in darkness. You know, it's like, because it's true. It's like Berlin in the winter is just like solidly dark. I don't know when you came, but it's like, but also like I run a bar in Schöneberg, which is where I'm at right now. It's called DV Bar, and it's open on the weekends. And like in the winter, it's like this thing where you like enter into like a planet. And I think like the girls understand that you have to like find your planet, like this place that's like kind of like a break from like the dark inkiness of the galaxy outside, which is the wintertime in Berlin.
Yeah, and they so did create a planet, right? Because I kind of I forgot that, but it's like in the beginning they really are rejected, and it's like I mean, in some ways, Hailey is just like the most impressive character, and I would want to be her best friend because it's like she takes it. She's like, no, like we are going to create like our own world, our own vibe, and it really is. I don't know. I think we all have those people in our life that just have this like force within them where they like will something and it like will become it.
Yeah.
And that about her was so magnetic to me.
Yeah, and I think also Berlin is a place where you can do that. Like, and it's like this, it's not like New York where it's like you kind of need $1 million to open a bar. It's like she also, like, I think runs on this thing where it's like you can sort of get away with a lot here, and especially back then. So I think it worked out to have her kind of personality in that time period in Berlin. And I don't know if it could be somewhere else, but it was very fun to write it set here. And I was very aware of not wanting to do injustice to the city because I love it so much and I live here and I respect everyone. And like I take it all seriously. You know, it's like there's this kind of like not trash, but I think like it's like party culture and like pop culture, but it's like to me I think there's also this seriousness to it because people take it seriously. And I think there's something like important about trying to like, and I think Zoe does that. Like she really has a filter to look through, kind of like thinks with a weight to things that like I think let it expand beyond from some sort of just like a hot party take.
Yeah, she studies it and there's a beauty to it. And I think there's those moments, that we all have in our life where like it feels like something like pierces through the veil and you're just like, oh, this is a real moment. Like
Yeah.
I'm like actually living, breathing,
Yeah.
like connecting with people. I feel alive and magnetic. And I think that's what is so powerful about a lot of that culture. And that like I think like Zoe sees like sparks and glimpses of that.
Yeah. I think, yeah, Zoe, Haley's charging, but Zoe gets to watch, which I think is also maybe the best seat in the house, you know? So,
Oh yeah, I love to be the sidekick. Tell us about your bar. I want to like be there having a drink right now. And you guys do like performance, a bunch of stuff there,
yeah.
right?
So like we opened it 3 years ago, which is like kind of like just before COVID. Great time to open a bar. And I've run a series of spaces and theaters, bars and theaters in Berlin. So I think this is like our fourth space. And during it's open on the weekend, and then during the week, Max Pedagoff, who I work with as an artist, we shoot a TV show here, and it's called Paradise, and we shoot it on 16 millimeter, and it's about a kind of meta version of the bar that uses a lot of our bartenders and regulars as actors, and it's sort of this alternative fiction that when we close the bar will be the only thing that is left. And it's set in 2023, and we always decided we were going to close in 2023, so we were sort of moving toward the future we were depicting. So yeah, it's been very fun, and if you're in Berlin you should come by for a drink. It's a lovely place to be, and filled with artists and writers and musicians, so it's fun.
That's so cool. Something about the 2023 that plan gave me chills. But can we watch it? How do people watch the show?
It's so annoying. So we decided
Okay.
while the bar was open, we would only show it in other bars on TVs because we were
Oh
like,
my
we
God,
don't.
that's cute.
Yeah, so like if we're ever in an exhibition, we'll always be like, well, what's the bar that everyone goes to? And we put a TV in it because we really like this way that it's like, it's not an image until it's over. Like I have this
Mm.
commitment, like I want it to be a real space and not like people come in thinking that they're gonna like be in this thing. And so instead, it's just this real place. And then in 2023, it'll be online or whatever. I don't know what we'll do with it. It'll show somewhere. But until then, you have to come or go see it in a bar. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna book a flight. No, that sounds so fun. Okay, before I let you go, last reader question. What are
Yeah.
you reading right now, or do you have any books that you're excited about or that you think are must reads that you've read recently?
Um, Elvia Wilk, Death by Landscape is so good, and I just read it and I really love it. I always like blank when people ask me what Nutbaum, is that her name? She wrote this amazing book about TV. I just finished it. It's called I Like to Watch. It's so
Ooh.
and so good, and like it's all her New Yorker criticism plus some other stuff, and it's just like it's brilliant. And so that I've been reading a lot of like nonfiction right now because I'm working on another book, so I have to not feed myself too much fiction or else I'll like just disappear in my own brain.
Are you
And like
working on a novel? Oh, go
I
ahead.
am, yeah, I'm working on another novel. And it's like this person, the main character is like so intense and she's so overwhelming. And I feel like I've just like left her sitting at a bar and she's like angry, waiting for me to finish. So I'm like very focused. And so I'm also reading like a lot of like books about writing TV. I'm like interested in that because it has this different way of dealing with narrative. But that's also because I can't read fiction right now. So it's not the like most generous answer, but
No, that's so exciting. I'm excited you're writing another novel. I always feel bad at the end being like, and are you writing another book? It's like I literally just wrote a book. Give me like 10 minutes.
I almost like because I couldn't figure out the ending on this book, and so I kind of was like, maybe I'm not writing it. And then like I finally got there. So now I can say like openly that I am, and I'm excited about it. But
That's
yeah.
amazing. Well, thank you so much for writing this book. If you guys haven't read yet, Other People's Clothes, it's so good, so smart, so entertaining. So thank you so much, Calla. Thank you everyone for joining. We are taking a break this next month, but our May book is so fire. So I hope everyone will join us. And Calla, yeah, thank you again, and I'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Bye.